Welcome to the Do You Know Him podcast. My name is Lowell King. I'll be your host today. Well, today's podcast is entitled Divine Appointments. I was thinking back over my life and thinking about these amazing times in my life that I either met a person or ran into somebody that I hadn't seen for a long time and had even been thinking about them, but you can't help but wonder if, in fact, I'm absolutely positive at this point that there is a divine intervention in arranging some of these occurrences that happen in your life, where you meet somebody that ultimately may have a long-lasting, lifetime effect on your life. And this story today is about a person by the name of Max Schroer. I call my friend Max. In fact, I was actually thinking about calling this particular episode My Friend Max, but I thought it might confuse people, and I thought maybe Divine Appointments might be a better title for this particular podcast. Obviously, one of the most important divine appointments I ever had was the day that I met my wife, Cecilia, and married her 37 years ago, which what I shared in an earlier podcast called Defining Moments. But today I want to talk about Max. There's been many people who have had major effects or things in my life, and Max and I became friends over kind of an interesting experience where he walked into an office where I was working. I wasn't even supposed to be the person to talk to him, but for whatever reason, everyone was either busy or they weren't paying attention to him, and I took it upon myself to go up and introduce myself and ask him if I could help. We subsequently dealt with a problem that he had with somebody that owed him some money. I helped him through the process, and that began this friendship between the two of us. He really appreciated me taking the time to help him, and even though he himself was an insurance broker and had a small real estate company not too far from my office, he just didn't want to deal with this particular situation himself, and he needed kind of somebody to step in and help him and be in between the two of them. Him and his person that owed him some money, and I was the person that filled in, and it happened to be a Christian person I was speaking with, so we were able to communicate from a standpoint of what was right, to be done to bring glory to God, so to speak. Anyway, that began this friendship with Max and I, and over the years, we had a chance to get together for lunch. We talked on the phone periodically. I had the pleasure of meeting his wife. My wife and I both met Elsie, who was just a wonderful lady, Elsie Schroer, and of course his son Myron and Cindy, Myron's wife, who was also involved in working in the office where Max was at. But going back to Max for a minute, because there was some amazing things that happened during the time of knowing him, and sometimes we just never know what a person we might meet, how they're going to be intertwined in our life, or how they may ultimately have a long-term effect on us. I was working for this mortgage company in Hayward when I met Max, and I subsequently went to work for Redwood Home Loans across the bay in Redwood City. And I think I shared the story in the last episode about this amazing miracle that occurred during my employment with Redwood Home Loans. But as I was working for Redwood, it became evident not only with the company I was working with before, but also with Redwood, that the people had lost confidence in real estate, and increasingly the real estate market was going in a negative direction. In fact, it's probably hard for people today with the real estate market the way it is to even think about a time But this was before 2008, which was a horrible experience when a lot of people lost their homes in America. But it was just at a time when the interest rates were really high. Real estate wasn't really selling well, and I found myself in a position where I was really in need of something more steady because I was in a commission sales position. So I took a position with Great Western Bank as a loan officer, and I was doing real estate loans through them, and then they started having financial trouble. And it just was one thing after another. And I remember as I was working for Great Western, and again, I shared the story of the miracle through Redwood Home Loans because my license was still over there. About the same time, Max and I were continuing our friendship, and that friendship was growing. But it got to the point where we were really up against the wall financially, and we had to move out of the home that we were renting at that time, and we really had no place to go. And I remember as we packed everything up and moved it into storage temporarily to try to figure out what to do with our lives, there was about a week there when my wife and my youngest son, Troy, had to move in with her parents, and I moved in with my mom and dad for a few days, which was not a really good situation at our point in life, but we didn't really have a lot of choices. We just had to take whatever was available. And I remember talking to Max about it, and just out of the clear blue sky, he called me, and he says, "Hey, Lowell," he said, I just was wondering about something. He said, "Elsie and I are about to leave in a couple of days. We're leaving for Indianapolis. We're going to the Indianapolis 500 races. We do this every year, and we're going to be gone for the whole summer visiting relatives back in Indiana." He said, "Would you consider house setting our home?" And I said, "Wow, Max, that is so cool of you to even think about that." He says, "Yeah," he said, "I'd feel real comfortable if you would be there." And he said, "Elsie and I talked about it, and we'd like you and Cecilia to come." So as it turned out, for the entire summer, we stayed there at Max's house. He didn't charge us any rent or anything. We just house sat the house, and it was such a blessing that he had offered to us. And I remember getting a call from him and letting us know that he was coming home. And I remember we were trying to figure out, we still didn't, our financial situation hadn't really improved. There was no place for us to go, so I didn't really know what to do. And I remember Max saying, "Well," he says, "if you want to, you can stay here as long as you want to." And I said, No, Max," I said, "you and Elsie need your privacy." And I said, "You've been more than generous." And I remember the conversation we had. He says, he says, "Right before I left, I rented this house over in Union City," and he said, "it would have been perfect for you." He said, I just wish I hadn't done that." But he said, it was before I told you could stay here. And he said, the people are on a 1-year lease. And he said, "That's probably one of the nicest places I have." He said, "Most of the stuff I have is kind of older and kind of run down in bad sections of town. But he said, if it was available, you'd be more than happy to be able to move in." And I said, "Well, what good would it be? Because I can't pay any rent right now." And he says, "Well, yeah, I guess it's a moot point at this point." So we agreed that Cecilia and I would move out on that weekend. And I wasn't exactly sure what we were going to do. I didn't know if we were going to have to go back to staying with the parents or what might be the case. But, we just kept praying and asking God to show us what to do. And on Friday, I got a call at my office. And it was Max. And he said, "Lowell," he says, "what are you doing right now?" And I said, "Well, I'm here at work." And he says, "Well," he said, "you're not going to believe what just happened." He said, "I had been over and talked to the tenants over at the house yesterday." And he said, "when I went over to inspect the property, the backyard was kind of overgrown with weeds." So he said, I reminded them that we had agreement that they were supposed to clean up the yard. And he said, I got a call this morning and they are absolutely furious. And he said, I'm not exactly sure what I said that got them so ticked off. But he said, they told me they're moving out this weekend. And he says, if you want that house, you can move in. And I says, Max, I said, this is all happening kind of fast here. I said, what are you telling me? And he says, well, they're moving out. He said, and I don't have a tenant. And I said, well, I don't have any money. And he says, Lowell, he says, I'm not worried about the money. He says, you're probably going to have to clean it up. He said, I don't know how clean these people were, but he says, you're going to have to go in and clean it up. And he says, you're welcome to stay there. And he says, when you start making some money, he says, pay me some rent. And I thought, wow, that is way beyond anything I could hope for. But we went over, we took a look at the place, and yeah, it did need to be cleaned up quite a bit. And so we never really had a lapse in a place to stay. We stayed at Max's until they were out of the house. We went in and cleaned it up, and we got our stuff out of storage, moved it all in, and there we were, living in Union City, California. Well, the time continued on with Max and I, and obviously we had this relationship, and almost about the same time, which I'm going to share in the next podcast, I had a change in my employment. Things became, well, I'll share that part in my next podcast. And my next podcast is called Real Estate, and I believe that's what I'm going to call it. No, you know what? I think I'm going to call it A Message from God, because that's exactly what did occur. So I'll do that. I will call it A Message from God. But what happened was, just to tell you the type of person that Max is, because I want this podcast is entitled to kind of be a tribute to a man who had such influence in my life and just demonstrated this amazing generosity. So having kind of spilled the beans on what the next podcast is going to be about real estate, I did make a transition into real estate, and that story is in the next story, and I think you'll find it pretty amazing. But in the meantime, I was driving a car that really probably wouldn't look good in any parking lot in any real estate office. It was kind of beat up and all, and next thing I know, probably about a week or 10 days after I started with the real estate company, I was still trying to figure out what in the world am I doing here, how am I going to do this job, and trying to get enough training so that I could continue on to try to make a living in real estate in a market that was in the tank, by the way. But there I was, and I got a call from Max. And he says, Lowell. And I said, yeah. And he says, you know that old Cadillac that I have? It wasn't really an old Cadillac. It was probably about 5 years old, but it was a beautiful car. It was a silver Cadillac DeVille. And he says, I'm going to get myself a new Cadillac. And he said, decided that rather than trade it in and have him give me nothing for it, you always said you liked that car. He said, would you like to buy it from me? And I said, well, that'd be a very good idea, Max, but I can't even pay you the rent. How am I going to buy a car from you? He says, we'll work it out. You can pay me when you get the money. And he says, you want to come over and take a look at it? And I said, yeah. I said, that'd be great. Or I guess he came and got me. That's what it was. And so we're driving around, and he let me drive it. And I said, well, it's absolutely perfect car for what I'm trying to do here in real estate. And he says, well, it's your car, and we'll work it out. And I laughed, and he said, we got to go over to drive DMV, and we'll transfer the paperwork so that the car's in your name. And I started laughing. I said, Max, I can't believe you're doing this for me. And he said, well, you're a friend, and you've stepped up for me, so let me step up for you. So we're driving over to the DMV, and all of a sudden it hit me. I'm going to have to pay taxes on the car. I'm going to have to pay registration to change it into my name and everything. And I haven't got $50 in the bank. There's no way I'm going to be able to do this. So I finally just told Max, I said, we can't do this. I'm sorry. I do not have the money to pay the transfer fees, the smog inspection, and the taxes, whatever. He says, he said, don't worry about it. He said, I'll go ahead and pay for it, and you just pay me when you get the money. Well, that's the kind of guy Max was. He was a guy who was the expression, and how can I say this? He was the demonstration of the kind of generosity that I guess we're all called to be as Christian people. It's not that we all have the power to do some of the things that Max could do, but he was always there to listen. He was a guy that extended himself well beyond what I would consider to be normal and trying to be generous with people. I saw him do it with other people as well as myself. He was a man I am blessed to say was my friend, a man that I could sit down and talk to about pretty much anything. And I just thank God for the day that he arranged for that meeting with Max and I at my real estate company I was working for. And I'll never forget him. I have no doubt in my mind that Max is where he belongs with the Lord right now. And I'm very, very happy, like I say, to have met him and Elsie and Myron and Cindy, just blessed people that God brought in my life. And I thank him every day for Max. Well, this is Lowell King, and I'm asking you today whether you do know him, but also have you experienced some of these divine appointments that God arranges to bring special people into your life? And if he has, and I'm sure he has, don't forget to tell the stories about those people who have done so much and shown you the example of what Jesus would be like if he was walking on this earth. And I know Max Schroer is one of those people, and I'm so grateful to have known him.